Lies of P. What a surprising game to come out. A Souls-like based off the story of Pinocchio. Sounds pretty strange, and it even ended up being what most would agree to be the best non-From Software Souls-like to ever come out. For me, the most important thing for a Souls game to get right is the bosses. The bosses are the biggest reason why I play these games, and is also the main reason why Sekiro is actually my favorite game of all time. Of course, the bosses aren't perfect in any game, but I think what Lies of P has here is really good. I haven't seen anyone on YouTube yet really go in depth with each of these bosses, in like a long video essay style, so that's what I plan on doing. And I will do my own boss ranking at the end. In this video, I want to highlight each of the boss's strengths, what they do right, and what I think they could do better, while trying to be as constructive as possible. Before we start, there are some things I need to clarify first. I'm basing this list off of 5 different playthroughs. My first playthrough is where my initial thoughts for the bosses will come from, and every subsequent playthrough is where I look at them a bit more thoroughly. I'll mention if my thoughts have changed since my first time playing. On my first playthrough, I didn't restrict myself to any real playstyle, but on my subsequent playthroughs, I went full motivity, full technique, and full advanced, and then my last one was just a new game plus playthrough. I wanted to see how different subclasses may experience each boss. I also restricted the summoning pool, because what am I, garbage at the game? Just kidding. I restricted the summons in order to look at the boss's movesets more thoroughly. It would kinda defeat the purpose if I just barreled through the whole game with summons and throwables, as you technically could do. I did also try to limit spamming throwables too, but at times, throwables and consumables will come up in my arguments. One more thing, I'm not going to be going over every single enemy with a boss health bar. My reasoning for this is just that some bosses aren't that interesting to talk about. I wanted to leave this list to only unique bosses that I would actually have a lot to say about. So for this list, I'm going to be leaving out all player type mini bosses because their movesets are literally just copies of the players with very little variation. I am also leaving out the Puppet of the Future, the Clown Puppet, and the Walker of Illusions, because they fit more into being mini bosses. I didn't find them to be complex enough to be included, and they mostly just spam the same couple of moves, despite being rather difficult. They also have clones that appear later on in the game, but without a boss health bar. So they kind of fit into that elite enemy slash mini boss kind of territory. Knowing that, my list can now easily be boiled down to this. If it has a fog wall, then it's on the list. So now we can get started with our very first boss. We start off this list with the Parade Master, and he leaves a great first impression. The tone of the game at the beginning was very dark and almost horror-like, with the creepy design of puppets, the dark and dreary streets of Krat, automated radio voice lines, and tons, and I mean tons, of dead bodies. The Parade Master fits in perfectly with the creepy vibe that the game was going for. The red eyes, the disturbing smile, the cage of bodies on his back, and even his clothes being blood red. Hold on, while editing this, I just realized that his clothes aren't actually red. They're just completely drenched in blood. Nice. His design gets a big thumbs up from me. The music is also great, which is consistent with all the bosses in this game, but I'll mention it if I think it's particularly good. The music is very dark and sinister, which fits him very nicely. When I encountered the Parade Master on my first playthrough, I was shocked by how good this fight was. This was my first time playing a Souls game outside of From Software's titles, and I was genuinely surprised and happy to encounter something that is on the same level of quality that From Software generally delivers. This boss isn't all that difficult, even for being a first boss. He acts more as the game's tutorial boss, similar to the Asylum Demon in Dark Souls 1, or even Ludex Gundyr in Dark Souls 3, instead of being a huge roadblock like Margit the Fell from Elden Ring.
Put these foolish ambitions to rest.
The Parade Master is here to help you get situated, and understand the game's basic mechanics. What a nice guy. Ugh. His moveset is very simple, which I would say is a good thing, as a bloated first boss could draw away new players from the game too quickly, and could give some unnecessary frustration early on. And without an open world setting with tons of content to explore before fighting him, like in Elden Ring, Lies of P doesn't have much of a chance for the player to level up besides just mindlessly grinding the beginning of the game. And now onto his actual moveset. What is unique about Lies of P compared to other Souls games is that through roughly a third of the game, you are mainly fighting giant robots, which is a nice deviation from the usual monster or oddly oversized human. Puppets are a pretty unique enemy type. Their movements are janky, twitchy, and unnatural, making them much more challenging to deal with. Normally, janky animations would be a bad thing, but in the case of puppets, I think it actually fits pretty well. The detail is subtle enough for you to notice it and for it to not affect gameplay in a hugely negative way. It makes them a bit harder to read, but not to the point where it feels impossible to tell when their attacks will land. It's like a little quirk that you have to work around when dealing with puppets specifically, which I like because you know you are dealing with a robot and not a human, so they would naturally act differently. What's good about the Parade Master is just how simple he is. He has very basic melee attacks and doesn't have any unexpected or cheap curveball attacks for you to deal with this early on. He does have a little bit of that animation twitchiness, but I felt like it affected him the least. His attacks are very easy to read and are well telegraphed, so there's no confusion on what he's doing. This is not only very important this early on, it's also a big contributor for my enjoyment of a boss. A boss's attacks needs to be well telegraphed so the player can see what is going on. The attacks can still be hard to dodge, but they at least need to be consistently readable and avoidable, and I think the Parade Master does this very well. He's also pretty slow, which gives you a lot of chances to sneak in hits while he's winding up or recovering. Allowing the player to find more avenues for aggressive play is a great and satisfying way to show off their improvement in the fight. It's something that I think Lies of P does very well. The more you fight him, the more of these openings that you'll be able to spot, and you'll think of more creative ways to hit him. It's very fun to take advantage of. While the fight is decently forgiving, I wouldn't exactly call him a pushover. I imagine he'd be pretty hard for anyone new to Souls games. The first time I fought him, it did take me a few tries to beat him, and I do have a decent amount of Souls experience. Despite that, I don't think he's unmanageable for new players. On my second playthrough, he was of course really easy. Almost to the point where I actually forgot that he technically has a second phase. He rips his freaking head off and uses it like a bat. It's a pretty cool transition. He gets significantly more aggressive and the fight gets more engaging in my opinion. I really like the new attacks he gets. His attacks get faster, he gets longer combos, this one cool attack that spins his whole torso around, and he charges at you more often, forcing you to engage. It's a nice little increase in difficulty. In this phase, his attacks are harder to deal with, but are still very fair and very well telegraphed. I cannot highlight enough how important I think it is for a boss to have these qualities. All of this makes a very solid boss fight in my opinion. The Parade Master, I think, is the perfect boss to start the game with. It's a very fun fight that challenges the player's understanding of the game's basic mechanics. I wouldn't call the fight outstanding, but it doesn't really have to be this early on. The Parade Master does what he needs to do, which is to give the player a little taste on what to expect going forward, and he leaves a very good first impression. The scrapped Watchman is a boss that blew me away super early on in the game. I'd put him at least my top 3 bosses in this game. The scrapped Watchman keeps the creepy tone of the game so far by having him slowly emerge from behind Trot City Hall Central Tower in a way that's straight out of a horror movie. With his weird agape mouth and the way he crawls unnaturally on all fours, I adored this creepy vibe that the puppets gave at the beginning of the game. I really love the Watchman's design. The lore behind him is great as well, and implements a tragic backstory to the puppets that we are killing. I'm not going to go over story for every single boss in this list, but my top 3 bosses I think have particularly good lore behind them, so I want to mention it. It is revealed after the fight in some notes and the whistle that you obtain in the arena The Watchman was actually a friend to the children of Krat. He was meant to act as a fun mascot for the police as well as a defense against criminals. After he was discarded for being defective because of this oversized battery they decided to put on his back, he was left abandoned at City Hall. During his time abandoned, some children from the slums would come to visit him. These children would affectionately name him Murphy. The Watchman would end up spending a lot of his time with these children, playing with them. Through the children that spent time with him, the Watchman would find his calling. Murphy became their friend and protector and cherished the time he spent with them. Murphy felt like he had a purpose once again. But after a while, less and less kids began to show up. They wouldn't show up due to illness. All of the children that once played with Murphy, that Murphy cared about and protected, along with every resident of Krat, succumbed to the petrification disease. Murphy was once again left all alone without purpose, but this time, much worse. Murphy, now feeling isolated and sorrow for his sick friends, he blamed the adults for the fate of the children and the spread of the petrification disease. After the puppet frenzy was initiated, the Watchman could now enact his feelings of revenge to anyone who attempts to enter City Hall, finding anyone there guilty for abandoning the children. This is a very great story bit. It really makes the Watchman feel special, and honestly, it does kind of make me sad to kill him after hearing about it, but you gotta do what you gotta do. I paid $60, I gotta move on. In terms of gameplay, the boss fares just as well, if not better. The scrapped Watchman is a huge difficulty spike from the Parade Master, but that's not a bad thing. He's very similar to Genichiro Ashina from Sekiro. He acts as an important skill check for the player to emerge significantly more in tune with the game's mechanics. And by the way, I am going to be making a lot of comparisons to From Software's bosses, considering they're basically the Jesus Christ of Souls-likes. And speaking of Jesus Christ, this guy has a lot of health. A bit too much health if you ask me. I don't know if it was just me being underleveled, but every time I fought him, it always took me a very long time to get the final hit. This makes this boss more of an endurance test. Some people might even feel the need to grind for ergo before fighting him. I could understand if somebody thought that the fight dragged on because of this, but I personally did not have a problem with the length of the fight. Although, I think it would be nice if the player had access to more throwables and consumables at this point of the game. The Watchman is immune to lightning, which eliminates the best weapon at killing puppets. So that would naturally leave acid as the proper status to use. But there aren't any good sources of acid at this point of the game, nor are there a large amount of throwables that you could even find anywhere. It would be nice to have a merchant to sell acid grinders and acid bottles to make the fight a little bit less of a Herculean test of the player's patience. Now on to his moveset, it's pretty simple. His attacks are very well telegraphed, but the timing is a lot more difficult this time around. A lot of his attacks are delayed, which can throw you off a bit, but they're not delayed to an annoying degree. I felt like I was able to get the timing down after a few times I saw the attack, rather than the delays being so bad that it's just a persistent problem throughout the fight. One thing that I really appreciate about this boss is just how consistent he feels. It feels like there is a purpose to every move that he does, rather than just him flailing around doing random attacks that wouldn't even reach you. Consistency is important for a boss to have because it allows players to get into that flow state that makes the combat in a Souls game so incredibly satisfying. The flow state of dodging, blocking, and parrying attacks seamlessly is such a satisfying feeling that you can't get anywhere else. And it's a big reason why people love this genre so much. Finding a boss's behavioral patterns is important to achieving this. It always kind of annoys me when a boss doesn't have any consistent behaviors and it feels like they're just randomly reaching into a pile of attacks. Of course, a little bit of randomness is important so the boss doesn't become monotonous. And I think the Watchman achieves this with flying colors. When he's close to you, you can naturally rely on the fact that he will decide to do one of his basic melee combos, instead of just randomly whipping out a dive bomb on you for no reason, and screwing up the camera in the process. When you are just barely out of range for you to attack, he will likely either do his delayed thrust attack or his even more delayed lunge. rather than just simply flailing around his basic melee combo, trying to hit you when you're nowhere near him. If you hit him too much during his recovery, you can easily predict when he'll do his get off me sweep attack. When you get far away, he will do his dive bomb attack. And all of these attacks have their own ways to deal with them. I want to highlight how consistent this boss feels. Sure, he's very challenging, but he's also very predictable. It makes the boss so much more enjoyable and makes the endurance aspect of it a lot more manageable. I know some of these things I'm saying might sound so simple and so obvious, like something that might not even be worth praising, but after my second playthrough of Elden Ring, I noticed how bosses didn't really feel this consistent. It feels like a boss will just kind of flail around and spam random attacks with no predictability, even if it's not logical for them to do at that moment, instead of based on the context of what's happening in the fight.
Why are you running? Why are you running?
It always kind of felt like bosses lost behavioral patterns. I imagine this boss would be a lot more frustrating if he just randomly picked attacks with no consistency. But he's consistent, and it makes his attacks feel so much more natural to avoid. The Watchman doesn't have any annoying curveball attacks that are meant to trick you into dodging at the wrong time, or any delays that are so egregious to the point where they just look silly. And in my opinion, that makes this boss fantastic. I haven't even talked about phase 2 yet. The Watchman doesn't get a huge change in his second phase, but I still like the transition. The lightning strike is pretty cool. Just like the Parade Master, he gets significantly more aggressive, his basic combos get a bit faster, but now he deals electric damage, bringing a bit of status management into the fight, which I like. I think the lightning is implemented in a very fun and interesting way. It forces you to find a better position after initially dodging without forcing you into unwinnable positions or completely destroying your options to retaliate. And it even still gives you enough time to sneak in hits before it goes off. But besides that, you don't really have to change your strategy at all this phase. He just gets a bit more challenging. The only one thing I would change is just one grab attack. It looks a little too similar to the lunge attack for my liking, and I feel like it's a bit unnecessarily confusing. And it also has a pretty long delay. It's a very minor critique, but I'd rather have all grabs look very distinct. I had a fantastic time fighting this boss, and he only got better upon me refighting him. The Watchman ends up being a very challenging, but also fair and polished boss fight, and it's easily one of the best fights in the game for me. After the Watchman, we have Fuoco the King's Flame. This one is one of the easier and more forgettable bosses in this game. Not that he's bad though, he's just decent and not super substantial. I don't have too much to say on his design. He's basically just a flame stoker, except instead of a shovel, he has a giant hand, and also a cannon. His design works, and fits well with the factory. While I found Fuoco to be a bit less challenging than the Watchman, I also unfortunately found him to be a bit more annoying. All of his attacks are significantly more delayed and tougher to get the timing down. It seemed very ambiguous when his attacks would actually land, to the point where I felt that it was a persistent problem every time I fought him. Delayed attacks on their own aren't hugely problematic, but when an attack is so delayed and unnatural looking that you find yourself constantly messing up despite seeing the attack over and over again, and ruining your flow state, the fight can get very unfun very quickly. I did kind of feel like Fuoco's animation was just freezing in place and then suddenly dropping his fist on me. His overhead slams are a pretty good example of this. It's the first example of an attack that I think is too delayed for someone to naturally get the timing down. Although, comparatively to other examples of egregious delays in this game as well as other games, these attacks are very tame. The attacks at least don't do a crap ton of damage or force you to sit through a lengthy grab animation, so it isn't very punishing to be hit by one of these. He's also pretty consistent. Almost all of his attacks have a pretty lengthy delay to them, so I at least felt like I was able to get used to them. A lot of his attacks also have other ways to avoid them besides just guarding and dodging. This one charging fury attack, to me, looks kinda silly, but it's an attack that can be pretty frustrating to parry. The hitbox is very awkward and it never lands when you expect it to, but it can be easily avoided by just simply walking to the right. It works every single time. His overhead fury attack, when spotted quickly, you can just backstep away pretty easily. I think it's nice when a boss has multiple ways of avoiding an attack, just in case if one happens to be annoying. It's not necessary for all of his attacks, but I like that these ones have multiple ways of avoiding them. The timing for the perfect guard is very strict, so I think it's nice that there is a way to actually avoid them without being forced to perfect guard them. The most unique attack he has in this phase is probably his spinning sweep attack. He'll charge up his fist and he'll do 3 spinning attacks. And parrying this is incredibly satisfying. I've seen online that some people actually found this boss to be harder than the Watchman, and I can totally see why with all the delayed attacks, and the stricter timings to guard the fury attacks. But for me personally, this boss was easier. I found the Watchman's more aggressive nature and his tankier health bar to be more difficult to overcome than Fuoco's moveset. Not only does he have a bit less health, but also you are given the opportunity to find more consumables at this point in the game, which I'm grateful for. And look, you can actually use the best weapon at killing puppets now. On to his second phase, I actually like it more than the first one. Fuoco's most unique trait is his usage of range attacks. He starts shooting fireballs at you, and he spews out these little oil mines. I find this to make the fight a lot more interesting. I had a lot of fun dodging and weaving around all these attacks. The arena is big enough for you to properly maneuver around the mines, and also see the fireballs coming before they hit you. It can be a bit annoying if he starts doing nothing but spamming fireballs at you, but if you get close to him, he'll stop shooting. He also has this one flame drop attack, which I'm a little mixed about. It covers almost 80% of the arena and you cannot outrun it. I found this attack to be pretty annoying, and at first I thought it was borderline unavoidable, but it does have a direct counter, which is nice. I didn't actually realize this until I saw someone else do it, but if you actually hide behind these pillars, the fire won't go around it. I'm not sure if that's how fire works, but whatever. Fuoco can also break the pillars. I think this could possibly lead to all of the pillars being destroyed, meaning that you can't actually properly counter the flame drop, but I've never had this happen before, so I think it's pretty easy to avoid. I did quite enjoy this phase. Fuoco is not my favorite boss, but I still liked him a lot. Despite being a bit of a lukewarm boss, he still manages to be unique. I like his more ranged and area denial focused attacks, his design is fine, and he has great music. And he's a very fitting boss to end the factory on. Overall, Fuoco is a very solid boss fight that makes a decent stride. Now this is where things get interesting. Fallen Archbishop Andreus probably has my favorite design in the entire game. His design is so out of pocket as the 4th major boss in this game. After fighting puppets and humans mainly, this guy was a huge surprise for me and a lot of people. I don't think any of us were expecting the kind of body horror that this game offers, and after being teased with it by the carcasses, this guy basically just hits you like a sack of bricks, showing you how fucked up these people can get from the petrification disease. I really like that intro. He also has my favorite boss theme in the game, which perfectly captures the unholiness that is this boss. Like I said before, you're going to hear me praise the boss's visuals and music a lot, but I think this one is particularly good. The gothic choirs are strong in this one, as they are in all of the tracks in this game, but this one takes it to a whole new level, and I love it. Onto his gameplay, I like this boss, but he does have a pretty decent amount of problems. At first, I thought his basic attacks felt a bit delayed, but I think it's fine here because this fight has the slowest pace so far. His attacks aren't delayed to an annoying degree like Fuoco, and they still look pretty natural with the animation. When you get used to them, they're not bad at all. If I had to make a comparison, it's kinda like fighting Mohg's first phase in Elden Ring. There is a very nice slow rhythm to his attacks, and it's pretty fun when you find it. And the pacing even kinda goes with the music. The only attacks I would say are annoying to deal with are his slams. The delay on them can be a pain to get used to, but not the worst. I kind of wish Archbishop's moveset was more complex. He mostly does basic swipes and occasionally attacks with his tongue, but that's about it. His moveset is pretty limited. Another problem this boss has is that he tends to push your back against a wall, which can end up screwing with the camera. It isn't a consistent problem, and it can be easily prevented by just simply circling around the arena, so I don't have a huge problem with it. Although, I did have this happen to me. So that was slightly inconvenient. He does have a lot of health between both phases. With him being the first surprise second phase in the game, dealing with 2 health bars could seem a bit daunting, but you can actually get his health down pretty easily. He has very long recovery times, allowing you to sneak in hits in between attacks, which is very fun to do. I've also noticed he has a pretty low stagger meter. I'm gonna show you an unedited clip from the beginning of one of my tries so you can get an idea of how low it is. It literally took me about 30 seconds to proc the stagger bar without even trying. I found that I could almost get a similar time with the Watchman, but I had to try a lot harder to proc it by parrying more attacks and using Fable Arts. And it's also much harder to land the charge hit once you actually get the proc. I was able to knock him down like twice or more without even trying or using weapons with higher stagger damage. He's also very weak to fire, which I had no shortage of, so overall I felt like I was doing more damage to him quicker than previous bosses, which was pretty satisfying. His second phase for me is when the boss gets a lot more interesting, but unfortunately more frustrating as well. First of all, props to the design of the boss again. This was a very entertaining phase change. The lighting is absolutely stunning, and the particles are a very nice detail. Both of these add to the holiness look to him. I really love this phase change. He looks so cool and creepy, and the music sells it as he's literally descending upon the earth, like a twisted angel. And I would like to sit and appreciate it for a second. Onto his mechanics, I enjoyed his little alternating sides gimmick. I found this mechanic to be very interesting. This is the first time I've seen this mechanic used in any Souls game, and the only other one I know about is the Flexile Sentry from Dark Souls 2, which I haven't played. One problem with this mechanic though is that the humanoid side is significantly more difficult to deal with than the other. His attacks are much harder to dodge and borderline unreasonable to parry. The animations for most of his attacks are extremely jerky and also have huge delays with instant spring hitboxes, which can be very frustrating to deal with. You can see how bad they are in his basic sweeps and his plunge attacks. Secondly, he's far more unpredictable and aggressive. He doesn't seem to have much of a consistent pattern or behavior that I was able to pick up on. It felt like he was a lot more random with his attacks, which I felt like it added a bit more challenge, but also a bit of frustration to come with it. Another thing that makes this side harder is his hitbox is very high up in the air, and is much harder to hit in general, which can be pretty annoying at times. I felt like I needed to stick very uncomfortably closer than usual to him in order to somewhat consistently hit him. He's also much more mobile, randomly sliding and gliding around the arena, and he can even do it while he's attacking. Whenever he decides to randomly do a jerky motion, it could potentially cause me to miss an attack. The camera is also noticeably screwier in this phase. It wasn't common enough for me to label it as a major flaw in the fight, but it's still something to be aware of. I think this could have been alleviated if the arena was a bit wider, but it's mostly fine the way it is. You do want to play more passively with this phase in general. It's much harder to sneak in attacks between his combos due to his more aggressive nature and his mobility, so you mostly have to wait for his recoveries. I'm not exactly sure if this difficulty difference is intentional, but it could lead to players wanting to avoid the humanoid side on purpose and forcing themselves into a more repetitive fight. But now onto his first side, he did get a bit of a glow up. He attacks faster overall, he has some new moves and longer combos. This side of him I actually find to be more fun. He's more aggressive and attacks faster, and I found that to be more engaging. Now on to the last thing I'd like to talk about is his giant laser. This attack is rough to deal with. It's a giant fucking laser that does a lot of damage and you cannot iframe through it. At first, you'll likely wonder how in God's name you're supposed to avoid this. This attack is the textbook definition of what makes a delayed attack unfun to deal with. There isn't any tell when the laser's going to come out. You just have to remember the timing, which is nearly impossible to do consistently when there's no proper telegraphed windup right before the attack is about to hit. And it's why I think this attack isn't good. This is definitely the worst part of the fight. It doesn't completely ruin it like a certain someone, but it certainly isn't fun to deal with. My wins were determined by me tanking the hit or by him not doing the attack, but you can interrupt it. That was pretty satisfying. I couldn't for the life of me guard the laser, but the Trident Slam was a bit easier for me to do for some reason, but still not very fun to deal with. When I was done with my 4 playthroughs, I installed a boss resurrection mod and went into this fight with the specific intention of trying to figure out how to avoid this one attack. I was pretty lost at first, but I remember seeing someone on Reddit saying that you can run underneath him, so I decided to try that, and I was actually a bit surprised at how well it worked. If you're on the side with the laser, quickly run underneath him and then turn left or right. You'll end up out of range of both of the attacks. I'm not sure if this counter is intentional, but I think it's perfect for people who thought this attack was annoying, and it definitely makes me enjoy the fight a lot more. Overall, I found this fight to be the most interesting one so far. Archbishop is an exceptional boss in this game, but he's brought down by some annoying problems. While he does have his problems, I still found this boss to be very enjoyable. This boss really surprised me when I first fought him, and I did have a lot of fun returning to him. If there is one thing I can definitely say about Archbishop is that he's left the biggest impression so far.
I want to go back to the old Krat. The old me. Before the greed overtook me.
Earlier in the video, I talked about how the puppets have very jerky animations, but I felt that it added a bit of personality to them as an enemy. They aren't as smooth or as fluid looking as something that you'd see in Elden Ring or Dark Souls 3, but they still felt natural, and the animation kinks were something that I was able to get used to. Now, a problem with Lies of P as a whole is that these animation kinks extend beyond just the puppets, and they were especially felt during the fight with the Eldest of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. This is the first miss for me on this list. He's a very annoying boss. He isn't awful, but he's not good. His moveset is very frustrating to deal with. He attacks way faster than you'd ever expect him to be, he has tons of awkward looking lunges, sudden 180-degree turns that make no sense, and he has very long combos with extremely varied attack speeds. This is by far the biggest problem of this fight. Almost every single one of his sword swings has some weird delay to it with a sudden hitbox. He'll switch from slow motion to 200% attack speed and it feels awkward as hell, as if every single attack is designed to land exactly when you don't expect it to. He'll just hold his sword in the air and then it suddenly comes down after an arbitrary amount of time. It sometimes feels like he's lacking some frames of animation. I felt like I could never get into a flow state while fighting him. Having varying attack speeds isn't necessarily a bad thing. It does heavily punish panic rolling and teaches the player to be a bit more careful. I just wish that his swings were a bit more consistent. You are going to absolutely hate the perfect guard in this game while you are fighting him. Guarding his attacks is ridiculously hard because of the inconsistent timings. He'll start off the combo with a sudden quick slash or a sudden stomp that you cannot react to unless you predict. The next 2 hits will be equally fast, and then suddenly he'll delay his next swing. Then the next one will be fast again, and then he'll delay the next 2 swings. It feels like there's no rhythm or consistent flow to the fight, and it makes it less enjoyable. There's also a decent amount of waiting involved while fighting him. His combos are very long and his attacks come out too quickly to sneak in hits between, so you're gonna have to wait for his punish windows if you want to attack, which can be pretty long sometimes. That was a lot of negative things, so I'm gonna say some positives before going over the other members. The intro cutscene is pretty badass, and the music is very catchy. It's in my top 5 favorites. The fight is also a lot more unique because it feels more like a duel. The intro sentence, "You ain't seen nothing like my brother," is ironically kind of accurate. Up until this point, all the bosses have been either giant robots and then Archbishop. So it's nice to have a human fight that feels more like an actual boss and has his own unique moveset, rather than just a simple player type mini bosses. While his attacks are incredibly hard to parry, actually nailing them is very satisfying. I'd probably say the most satisfying out of all the bosses I've covered so far. Nailing this spin attack is just oh so good. And it kind of dips into what makes Sekiro's boss fights so satisfying. Also, thankfully, I never actually felt 100% forced to parry. All of his attacks can be dodged through, and it's not like the hits come out too quickly for you to be forced to parry them. Aside from maybe the spin attack. His vertical fury attack can be easily avoided by just simply stepping to the right, and the horizontal fury attack can be avoided by just dodging backwards, so you don't have to deal with the egregious delay. Another thing that I do like is that Eldest Brother does have a critical weakness. Eldest Brother and the other members are very susceptible from being hit stunned from bigger weapons. I had so much more trouble on my advanced playthrough because I was using 2 weapons that had very little stagger damage. I didn't realize this before, but in my Motivity playthrough I was actually interrupting a lot of his attacks, which allowed me to beat him on my second try. The lack of flinch given from smaller weapons really made this boss a pain to go back to. So definitely use a heavier weapon if you're having trouble with him. Now after you get about a quarter of his health down, we have our first extra member join the fight. The youngest of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. This little brat is by far the most annoying out of the 3 extras. She's extremely agile and a lot of her attacks hit you in the air or suspend you in place. She does very little damage. Her goal seems to be mostly just to stun you, which is really annoying. It's also very hard to tell when she's done attacking. Sometimes she'll just stall herself, not doing anything for like 3 seconds, then suddenly swing her swords or kick you into the air. It's not fun to deal with. She attacks super quickly and will outpace most weapons in the game, so you have to do a lot of predicting when going in to attack her. Sometimes it'll feel impossible to hit her because she can dish out like 2 or 3 attacks before you can even do one. And if you hit her once, she will likely jump out of the way so you can't hit her again. It can be very difficult when using a small weapon, although sometimes I was able to do this. But it isn't consistent. Sometimes she'll just keep jumping out of the way before I can land another light attack. It's also pretty much impossible to get a backstab on her. I feel like she would be an okay addition if it wasn't for the obnoxious hit stun. Her mobility isn't hugely problematic, but when combined with the attack speed and the hit stun, it makes her a real pain to deal with. One thing that I do appreciate, when another member of the Brotherhood joins the fight, Eldest Brother goes into a much more passive state, only charging at you every now and then. Thank God. His charge is very well telegraphed. He yells before he does it, his charge isn't all that fast, and the attack itself is pretty easy to avoid. It feels very good to dodge between both of them at the same time, and it doesn't feel unfair. So many duo bosses run into the trap of constantly attacking you at the same time, making it impossible to dodge all the hitboxes coming at you. And yes, it does happen a little bit in this fight, but it can be avoided as long as you purposely position the other members away from the Eldest Brother. That's actually the biggest positive I can say about this boss, is that it really felt like my positioning mattered. It forced me to change my approach to the fight in a way that I found interesting. Now on to the second member, the eccentric of the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. He isn't all that special. He has the worst mobility of the 3, he uses a spear, and he has that same annoying charging thrust that all the spear puppets have. Other than that, there isn't too much else to say about him. He's the easiest to backstab, so there's that. He's the easiest to deal with in general, to be honest. And next is the Battle Maniac of the BRB. Huh. More like BRB, I gotta find a better boss. Anyways, he's the strongest out of the three. He seemed to be the only one to do a substantial amount of damage. He's also the most aggressive and has really long combos with really far lunges that are very hard to escape. He also has the puppet string, which can feel a bit cheap at times, but it does very little damage, so it's not a huge problem. Nah, who am I kidding? It's pretty damn annoying. The hit stun and the tether is very obnoxious. You can see a consistent pattern with every member of this fight. They're all just incredibly fucking annoying. The eldest brother has janky animations, long combos, and an inconsistent flow to his fight overall. The youngest is the most obnoxious and annoying, with the most amount of hit stun, incredibly fast attacks that will outpace most of your weapons, and annoying as hell hit and run tactics. The eccentric has that one spear thrust that stun locks you, and the battle maniac has the puppet string, and very long combos as well. The other members' movesets don't really complement the eldest brothers, they feel more like a nuisance. The members themselves do add an emphasis on positioning, which I like, but that's about it. They don't do much damage, and everyone just has melee attacks. I think it'd be cool if they mixed their attacks together in an interesting way. Like, maybe if they had some team attacks that forced you to act differently depending on which member is in the arena. Or if each member had their own ranged attack, which shouldn't stun lock you, and maybe they could throw it at you while the eldest brother continues to pursue you. This is something akin to one of my favorite bosses in Dark Souls 3, the Demon Duo. One demon is aggressive and goes for melee attacks, while the other one hangs back and does a very well telegraphed and easy to dodge ranged attack. Or like Sister Fried and Father Andriel. Father Andriel slowly pursues you, while Sister Fried fires a well-telegraphed ranged attack that is pretty similar to the demon's poison gas. The same emphasis on positioning, but far less annoying. Unfortunately, the other members mostly just act as a distraction from the main boss, and it makes this gank fight subpar compared to the better ones from the Souls series. While I do think this boss is a worthy candidate for worst boss in this game, this fight is far from the worst gank fight that I've ever had the displeasure of fighting. Unlike, say, the Godskin duo or the Valiant Gargoyles, here, it does feel like there was somewhat of an attempt to make the enemies work together, instead of just being two separate bosses from earlier in the game crowbarred together into one fight. But the most utterly disappointing part of all of this is that he doesn't even give you a boss ergo. It's just a regular fragment, and it's not even worth the same amount as a regular boss ergo. Ugh. This boss was unfortunately very frustrating. It's a very flawed fight, but despite all the negative things that I've said about it, you could do far worse. I don't think the fight is absolutely abysmal. The characters themselves are pretty badass, I like the emphasis on positioning, and I like the feeling of having a legitimate duel with my opponent, and the orgasmic satisfaction of actually landing perfect blocks on him. He does have some good qualities. It's actually kind of funny because gang fights have a reputation of either being one of the best fights in this series or the absolute worst things ever conceived. There's literally no in between. There's no good, there's no great, there isn't even okay. It's either amazing or abysmal. And this boss somehow managed to find me in the middle. Well, at least kind of, sort of, more towards the bad, but you know. Ways I'd want to improve this fight would be to make Eldest Brother's attack speed more consistent, smooth out his animation so there's more wind up with a clear arc to his weapon, and to give the fight a more consistent flow. I'd want to make the other members cooperate with the eldest brother a little bit more, and change their moveset so they add more to the fight rather than just being a momentary mini-boss distraction. And also at the very least, if you aren't going to end with a boss ergo, then end it with an ergo fragment that gives you more points than what a boss ergo is worth. This boss was a bit of a mess, unfortunately. I can't say I didn't have some enjoyment fighting him, but unfortunately, he's just an incredibly flawed and mostly unfun fight. But fortunately, many bosses get much better from here, especially this next one. The King of Puppets is mine and most people's favorite boss in this game. I have very little critiques with this boss. He's just amazing all around. Amazing looking arena, great character design, two of the best boss themes in the game, a pivotal moment in the story, a genuinely surprising phase 2, his moveset is very fun to fight against, he's one of the hardest bosses in the game but still feels fair, and for me, he was the most memorable fight in the game. Let's start with his visuals and his design. The Estella Opera House was probably my favorite dungeon in the game. It's absolutely beautiful, and it gives us a visually interesting arena to fight him in. His design is amazing as well. He looks exactly how I'd expect him to look. Even so, he still looks very unique. He's so dapper and well dressed, and he looks so much more well refined than the other puppets that we fought earlier. His model is also very detailed. I like it a lot. The music also reflects the pretty visuals, while also matching the tone and pace of the fight. The music is very sad and tragic, which matches the tragedy of the character Romeo, the king of puppets. The story context here is that the Parade Master, the Watchman, and the King's Flame were all acting as the King's messengers, trying to get P to join their side, but unfortunately, all three of these puppets were still berserk from the puppet frenzy, and P could not understand their automated messages without using the puppet decoder. We can see the messages from the puppets trying to convince P to join the King's side, and stating that he is one of them. After that plan fails, the king tries one last thing to convince us to join his side, by showing us what Geppetto plans on doing with us at the end of the game. I don't really know how he knows this, but whatever. When P denies his request, the king is upset by this, and has no choice but to stop us forcefully. This is even more upsetting when you find out that the king of puppets was P's best friend, Romeo. And now, Romeo is forced to kill his best friend, who has no memory of him. Well, now I want to join his side. But that would mean that I wouldn't get to fight my favorite boss, so on to gameplay. The beginning of the fight matches the pace of the music. It's very slow. All of his attacks have minor delays to them, which can be hard to nail the timing for at first, but the whole fight keeps a consistently slow pace, so it works really well. His moves are pretty limited at the beginning. He mostly dishes out these sweep attacks and these little spinning combos. He has a decent amount of mobility by jumping around the arena, but that's about it. But that changes after he loses about a quarter of his health and gets into a pseudo second phase. After that, the pace picks up a bit. His attacks get faster, he jumps around a lot more, he starts attacking out of his jumps, and he gains some other new tricks. He has this grenade move, which gives him a bit of area denial. He has this multi-hit arm combo, which if you're feeling ballsy, you can get some very satisfying perfect guards. He has this electrofan shockwave thing, which acts as a get off me move. And he also has this move, which you actually have to stay near him to avoid. The king has the most varied and unique moveset so far. Every single one of his attacks you have to respond to differently, and I really like that. His varied moveset made the fight very engaging for me, and I didn't find any of these attacks to be frustrating to deal with. One detail that I also find really cool is that most of the king's attacks knock you backwards if you guard or perfect block them, even his basic combos. Sure, this exists with some bosses on some of their large attacks, but with the king, it's for far more of his moves. This is a fairly unique trait, and it kind of makes him feel more powerful and more of a threat than the previous fights. Even if it just turns out to be a detail that was unintentional, and maybe I'm just overanalyzing, but it was something that I noticed and I thought it was kind of cool. The screen shake on his footsteps is also a very nice touch. Everything about this boss just oozes personality. I only have very minor critiques towards this boss. The arena is a little small for someone of his size. I've had more camera problems with this fight than I have with most bosses in this game. Not as much as Archbishop and a couple of later ones, but still enough for me to mention it. A lot of his attacks involve him walking towards you or jumping at you, which can lead to you being pushed into the wall and not being able to see what's going on. The camera problems are pretty infrequent, but I wouldn't mind if the arena was made a bit bigger. Also, to be honest, the double hit that he gains on his basic combos is a bit annoying. In his second phase, his basic combos now hit you twice in very quick succession. You could spam guard to block it, but it's pretty unreliable, so I'd rather just have the second hit be removed. Or even better, have the second hit you a bit later. And honestly, I don't really have any other complaints about him. He's my favorite boss, and he's great. You know that feeling that you get when you're watching a boss's face change? And you just know how unbelievably fucked you are? Well, that's it. I've had a good run. I'm done. I just knew this phase was going to be brutal, and it was. Especially when the first phase was already pretty hard by itself. To fight this after was extremely daunting. It catches that feeling in a Souls game when you are fighting something that feels insurmountable. Something that feels like such a wall that you have no idea how you'll come any close to beating him. But you keep pushing, barely making a dent in his health bar at first. You keep learning the boss's moves. You get better at dodging and retaliating, and then you land the final hit and it's just so satisfying. Romeo is a candidate for hardest boss in this game, but for me there's a more obvious pick for that later. On my first playthrough, he took me about the second longest to beat. He is a very difficult fight, but he isn't unfair. When I first fought Romeo, I initially thought that he was too aggressive and that his attacks came out too quickly. In Lies of P, I got used to playing more aggressively compared to other Souls games and being rewarded for it. And then Romeo came along and threw my back against the wall. He felt like an enemy who attacked a bit too often to the point of preventing me from actually being able to retaliate. I felt like I was being suppressed of options and doing way more dodging than attacking. It was a similar problem that I was having with Elden Ring, where I was simply sitting back and watching enemies do ridiculously long and flashy combos without getting the chance to actually do any attacking of my own. I was thinking, how in the hell could someone do this with a heavy weapon, as I was using a rapier on my first playthrough? I can confidently say that I take back every single one of those thoughts, and I truly think that this boss is not only fair, but one of the most fair and balanced bosses in this game, despite being one of the hardest. When returning, I had way more trouble with Eldest Brother and some of the later bosses that I considered to be easier than Romeo. This boss is learnable and fair, even if it doesn't feel that way at first. He doesn't have any cheap bullshit, and every death felt like it was my fault. Romeo, outdoing himself, has the most complex moveset so far. He is relentlessly quick and gives very little breathing room. There were so many moments where I thought I was safe to heal, only for him to throw his scythe at me or freaking dive bomb across the room. He'll dodge your attacks, he'll parry you, he'll freaking skid around behind you and backstab you, knock you into the air. It's freaking awesome. He can seemingly string together all his attacks into combos however he wants to. What I mean by this is that a lot of his combos are unique despite having the same attacks in them. Every attack he does flows so naturally into the next one, and you usually don't know what he's going to do next. But every single attack does have a minor delay to them, giving you enough time to identify what he is doing. The fastest hit he has is this one that pulls you into him, and even this still gives you enough time to identify it. His attacks also aren't very rapid like something you'd see from Millennia, instead opting for these very well telegraphed slashes. He doesn't have any cheap sucker punch attacks that ruin the pace of his fight. You know, the attacks that always remain in the back of your mind, and they unconsciously make you dodge too early. He's super aggressive, but he leaves plenty of openings to retaliate. The AI seems to know exactly when enough is enough. He isn't constantly attacking you. And then there's his flaming combo. Ooh my god. There's a lot of frustration surrounding this attack, but it isn't unfair. Each individual hit does very little damage to you. You can only really die from it if you fail to dodge at least more than half of his swings. It doesn't at all ruin the fight. It's kind of like his own version of waterfowl dance, except you can actually see what is going on. There are a couple of awkward looking delays inside of his combos, but it's not that big of a deal. It is supposed to be one of the hardest attacks to avoid, and removing the delays from the hit might remove a lot of the challenge from blocking such a powerful and unforgiving attack. He also does stay in front of you the entire time, so you can see every single slash, allowing you to figure out the timing for each of them. And also, the hitboxes actually come out with the slashes, instead of just coming out at arbitrary times. Maybe I'd like it if they slowed down the slashes just a little bit, so us dodgy boys can sidestep through every single one, but I think it's meant to be perfect guarded, so it's fine. And perfect guarding it will just make you feel like the biggest badass ever. I think this attack is still fair, albeit extremely hard to deal with. The Enhanced Guard Grinder and the Stamina Wish Stone might be a good choice for you if you're having trouble with this specific attack, although you have to find the time to actually use both of those. I love this boss. Both phases are fantastic. This boss did everything right. The arena looks great. The music is amazing. The pace is fast and engaging. His moveset is unique and fun to fight against. The lore behind him is great. He's arguably the most challenging fight in the game, but is still fair. Romeo, the King of Puppets, is Lies of P at its best.
This is what real freedom feels like. Thank you, Carlo.
Welcome to my reign.
I'd like to start this off by saying that I love Colosseums in video games. I love when developers take our main characters and put them in front of an audience to show off their skills. And it really makes you feel like a badass showing off in front of everybody. Champion Victor lightly taps into that atmosphere when you are fighting him. It's a one-on-one style cage match, but with obviously no crowd to please, just you and him. I still really enjoyed the atmosphere of this fight. The Grand Exhibition conference room is a really cool looking boss arena. The lighting is great in here with the sunroof and the top light. I still really enjoyed the atmosphere of this fight despite not having an audience. Champion Victor himself is pretty badass. The way he walks into the ring like a WWE star, then does his big combo, which literally knocks the camera down. I like him. The visuals and cinematography is great. On to the fight itself. How exactly does Lies of P follow up its best boss yet? Really well, actually. Victor is great, but he's a little too easy. He's very memorable for the reasons I mentioned before, but he didn't really give me much of a challenge. My first time playing, I actually managed to beat him on my first try. His HP and damage are a bit low for where he's situated in the game, and his moveset isn't all that complex or hard to deal with either. He's very easy to predict, and he isn't all that tricky. He is a brawler, so it is kind of to be expected, but I would have liked it if he had some more difficult moves. While I do wish Victor was more challenging, that's not to say that I wasn't engaged while fighting him. He's not easy in a pathetic way, if that makes sense. It's more like he's easy because he's very simple to understand, and he's also another very fair boss. He doesn't have any gimmicks. He's arguably the simplest and most straightforward boss in this game. I felt like it was easy to get into a flow state and have very good engagements with him. His combos are also really fun to dodge through. Just like most of the bosses on this list so far, Victor is very different from anything that we've seen. He's our first true brawler type boss in this game. Sure, Archbishop used his hands and other enemies do too, but this guy, it's like his whole thing. The fight is very fast paced, arguably faster than Romeo's. He has a lot of hits per combo, but he dishes them out very quickly, so there isn't much downtime. His attacks are easy to read, but the speed and frequency can trip you up. He'll sprinkle in a couple of delays into his combos, but they're not tough to deal with. He also absolutely melts through stamina when blocking, and was constantly breaking through my guard, so you have to be very careful when trying to perfect guard. And like normal, I sound like a freaking broken record at this point, guarding these combos is very satisfying. The music also fits this incredibly fast pace. I don't know if it was because the fight was just over before I could properly listen to it, but I didn't find this track to be all that memorable. But the more I listened to it, the more I really began to like it. The biggest issue that I had with Victor isn't really a major one, but I still want to mention it. Smaller and faster weapons are hugely favored in this fight. This absolute behemoth of a man barely flinches to anything, and it takes a very long time to stagger him. It's a pretty neat trait for Victor, but it makes heavy weapons much harder to use against him. And also because of how fast he attacks, he can outpace most slow weapons too. They still feel mostly viable, but it's something that I think that people using the wrench or the pickaxe might find very annoying. I don't mind some bosses slightly favoring certain weapon types, but I feel like it was a little too far here. Especially because heavy weapons by nature are a bit harder to use than light weapons. Other than that, there's very little to complain about here. I had a very fun time on all my fights with him. He has a pretty nifty phase change with his body being pumped with ergo in order to make him stronger. Simple, but effective. The biggest thing he gets besides more serious gains is that he gains a ton more distance closing attacks. Charging attacks, jump attacks, lunging attacks. He becomes much more relentless, and it does add a little bit more challenge. This fight in particular, you really need to pick the right times to heal. It's very similar to Romeo, but it's a bit more prevalent here. He leaves you very little room to breathe and zero chance of running away. This actually makes his second phase feel pretty different from the first one. At first, he was mostly just super close to you doing his combos, only using a charge or a lunge if he needed to close the distance. But in his second phase, these lunges and charges are far more frequent. He'll end a lot of his attacks behind you and then go in for another charge. It's a pretty fun back and forth, and I really like timing perfect guards on these attacks. He doesn't charge at you so often to the point where he's just away from you most of the fight. There's still very little downtime, which is good. And to be honest, that's all I really have to say about him. Victor is a very simple, easy to understand fight, and it's mostly to his benefit. He feels very fair. I do wish the fight was a bit more difficult, but despite that, I thought this was a very good boss fight. He did pretty much everything right, just barely shy of the difficulty. Victor shows how a very simple boss fight can still be very fun. Oh boy, this guy is controversial. The green monster of the swamp. This guy does have his fans, but my god, does he have his detractors. Personally, I do lean more towards the former, but I cannot deny how frustrating he can be, especially on a first playthrough. First off, I would like to praise his design and music. I love the presentation here. His design is very cool, and it really makes you wonder what this monster originally was. He has some traits of a crab, fab, like his eyes, the way he moves, and his phase change, but his body is kind of human-like. I love the sound he makes too. The growling mixed with unnatural squeals, gurgling, it all makes a sound effect that sounds straight out of the movie Alien. It's all great stuff. I do wish they went a bit crazier with his design and maybe create something a bit more Lovecraftian, but I still like the way he looks. The music is also fantastic. The song is in my top 3 favorites in the game. It's so freaky and chaotic, and it fits the pace of the fight. Now onto the fight itself, it is a bit all over the place. His attack speeds can vary a lot between all of his moves, and it makes a pretty chaotic pace. He feels more chaotic to me because of how often it feels like the pace of the fight is changing, and because of how often he rapidly scutters around the arena and charges at you. Normally this would be a bad thing for the fight, but it actually kinda works here, at least a little bit. You could think of it more like a unique trait of this boss, rather than a blatant flaw in his design. I kinda like it. So why is it not much of a problem for me here, but with Eldest Brother it was my biggest complaint? The reason for that is the severity in both cases. With Eldest Brother, his attack speeds were constantly shifting mid-combo. His attack behavior felt more random, not only in terms of speed, but also in terms of what attacks he wanted to do at what time, which harmed the flow of the fight and made it feel more awkward to me. Compare that to the Swamp Monster, who felt more consistent overall, and most of his attacks felt more natural to nail the timings for. What also helps is that the Swamp Monster has a dedicated slow combo and faster combo. The slow combo has 3 delayed hits that ends with a fury attack, while the faster one starts with a roar that signifies he's more aggressive, and goes in from some average to fast speed swipes with 1 delayed slam in the mix. These made him feel more consistent and fair to me. He also does at least have consistent behavior, so it doesn't just feel like he's throwing random bullshit at you. Whenever I got close to him, he would do one of his 2 combos very consistently. If I manage to get a hit in while he's not doing anything, then he'll do his get off me move. At mid-range, he'll use his lunge or he'll spit acid, which are both very well telegraphed. And getting further away, he'll either charge at you or do his burrow attack. It feels more like controlled chaos, if that makes sense. He also doesn't have that many moves compared to other bosses, so there isn't a lot for you to remember. He has just enough moves for the fight to not be monotonous, but not to the point where he feels bloated. If anything, I think he leans a little bit more towards not having enough attacks, but I think he's at least alright where he is. The chaos he brings to the fight is kind of fun, and I don't think it's too unreasonable here. But this does come with some problems. I understand why he's frustrating for a lot of people, and I do think this fight could be executed better. Like I said before, the speed of the Swamp Monster's attacks does vary a lot. I don't have a huge problem with this by itself, but what I do have a problem with is with the 2 extremes. This one scorpion stab is pretty annoying to deal with. The attack is very sudden and there isn't much of a tell for it, and when you get hit by it, it can feel a bit cheap. Then on the opposite side, we have the extreme delays, and there's quite a few of them. These are present in both of his main combos. The delay on these slam attacks look very unnatural. I think it would fit the monster better if his attack speed only ranged from fast and sudden to maybe around average. None of his attacks should reach this level of delay. His fury attacks are pretty brutal to deal with, and you might just end up banging your head against the wall trying to remember the timings. The charging attack also lands pretty inconsistently. I found it to be a bit easier to parry than Fuoco's, so at least that's good. The varying attack speeds can make perfect guarding him very frustrating, and unfortunately, this is one of the few bosses where I would say that perfect guarding is absolutely integral. His tracking is very accurate, and you cannot position yourself in a way that would cause the attacks to miss you. He lunges very far and he can turn very quickly. His damage seems to be noticeably higher than most bosses as well, so it feels extremely punishing when you're actually hit by him in particular, unless you have a crap ton of defense. If you're watching this and haven't fought him yet, you're probably hearing everything I'm saying and thinking, holy fuck, this guy sounds like a nightmare, but I'm not done yet. This is also one of the few bosses where I really had to worry about status buildup. Decay isn't unique to this boss, but this was the only fight where I actually had to worry about it. I cannot stress this enough to come to the fight with the highest decay resistance possible. And make sure you have a ton of attribute resistance and also cures, because he can proc decay on you very quickly. This is actually something that I do like, because encountering a boss where I actually had to worry about status buildup was at least interesting. Sure, the Watchman has his lightning, Fuoco has fire, and Archbishop has his tongue with decay, but in those fights I rarely found myself to be at risk of being procced. Fire will also help you a lot in his first phase. He's weaker to it than most enemies. At times I was able to proc it in like 2 hits, and it deals tons of damage, giving you some way of making this phase easier. But, of course, he has a surprise second phase. I'd first like to say that I absolutely love this phase change. It was genuinely unexpected, and I certainly wasn't expecting to see the Watchman again. The monster taking over the Watchman's body is pretty cool, and the animation and music for this are great. It was cool to see him use the Watchman as a shell like a crab. This isn't just a cosmetic thing either. He actually gains some of the Watchman's moveset and traits. Boss reuse isn't a new thing to Souls games, and sometimes can feel a bit cheaply implemented, but I think it's used here really well. I will go more into detail on the subject of boss reuse in a little bit. I just wanted to quickly mention it here because I think the Swamp Monster is a good example of boss reuse done well. He has a few of the Watchman's basic combos and animations, but it only makes up a small portion of his new moveset. Since he has some of the Watchman's attacks, you'll likely be familiar with them already, so it made this fight a bit easier to manage, and it didn't feel repetitive. I also like that he'll add his little scorpion pincer to some of his combos. He also gains resistance to fire, and he doesn't lose his resistance to decay. I think it's a nice little detail that also increases difficulty because you can't take advantage of status as easily. So say goodbye to the little relief that fire gave you in that previous phase. If you want to use status, you'll unfortunately have to settle for his neutral resistance, which is lightning, but it's still pretty good on him. I did mostly enjoy this phase, but I'll admit, I had some growing pains with this one. This phase gets much harder than the first phase. The fight gets more frantic with him running around and jumping all over the place. The constant charging and running around the arena is a bit annoying to deal with, essentially forcing you to wait for your turn to attack. That mixed with the jumping, this one rapid attack with the little scorpion tails, it feels like there's very little opportunity to attack him sometimes. Which is true to a degree, but again, these attacks make up a decently small portion of his moveset. It could be pretty annoying if you get unlucky strings of him just jumping around and running and jumping and charging, but I've never had this happen long enough to a point where it really annoyed me. His basic combos get much more fun to parry for me. The fight is more consistently fast paced, and he loses the egregious delays from before. The only attacks that I really had problems with were his charge attacks. Like before, it's really difficult to tell when the hitbox will hit you, and it feels really inconsistent to parry. And then there's the camera. I actually haven't had that many problems with it, but I've heard a lot of people have. His arena is a little bit cramped compared to other bosses, but I felt like he wasn't really pushing me against the wall or anything. He also does tend to back away a lot, so I felt like it wasn't really a problem for me. Another thing, despite how fast and how much the Swamp Monster is moving, he actually stays on screen very consistently. The camera is a bit jerky, but I didn't find it to be all that disorienting. Although I think it would be better overall if the arena was made wider, but if you constantly try to position yourself towards the middle, then you'll likely be fine. The fight is more frantic and chaotic, and to be honest, I found it to be pretty fun. He does have a lot of health in this phase. I think it'd be nice if he gave some of that health to his first phase, because I felt like the first phase was over a bit too quickly, and the second phase did kinda drag on a little bit. I still think the second phase should have noticeably more health than the first one, but I feel like the gap is a bit too large. But overall, I still had fun with this fight. I like this guy. I like his design, I like his music, and I like his difficulty. I like that the swamp monster is a fight that you need to get good at. Sure, that exists with every boss in this game, but I feel it's more prevalent for him. Overpowered items, bugged tracking, bad AI, and poor hitboxes will not help you through this fight. You need to learn his behaviors, his attack patterns, his timings, and his recovery windows, with pretty much no easy way out, and I respect that. And I cannot deny that despite his flaws, I still had a lot of fun with him. His difficulty is brutal, but it still didn't feel unfair to me. I found his moveset overall to still be very engaging, despite being frustrating at times. But best of all for me, he still has consistent behaviors to pick up on, and gives you ample time to process what attack he's doing next. Aside from one. This is a boss that tests your patience and your ability to keep your cool when fighting such a crazy boss, and I like that about him. The Corrupted Parade Master is arguably the least substantial main boss in this game, and because of this, I honestly don't have a whole lot to say about him. He's notable enough to bring him above mini-boss territory, but he only has one phase, he's really easy, and he's not important to the story. This guy is basically just a glorified phase 3 for the Parade Master, with a dash of Archbishop. He's not a bad boss, he's just a little unremarkable. He's just the Parade Master's phase 2 with a couple of new moves. He feels a little incomplete. It would be great if this boss had a phase 2 with a brand new moveset. It'd be cool to see the corruption go further into him and make him stronger. Something like that would make him more memorable and fun. On a more positive side, I do like his design. Seeing the corruption actually mutate a previous boss is pretty neat and unexpected. He has a similar face to Archbishop, which is a pretty interesting detail, and he has this worm thing come out of it. That looks pretty cool. His entire left arm is made of what the swamp monster was made of, with these weird maggot-looking fungus stuff. I do like how they use this boss to showcase how the corrupted ergo is spreading into the puppets and controlling them. It's a neat idea, and it makes me wonder what he would look like if he was completely taken over. And I do appreciate that while this is a reused boss, they have at least a decent reason to reuse him. I do think it's done a bit better with the swamp monster because it was a lot more subtle and it offered a cool looking phase change. But if they had to completely reuse one of their bosses, then I think this is a decent way to do it. He's given a tweaked design and a tweaked moveset, and also a bit of context to why he's here again, instead of hypothetically dumping Astal in a random cave again or something. Oh, sorry, I meant like Archbishop on a street or something. I don't know what came over me. It is just the Parade Master, so the fight is kinda just as good as it was previously. It's just not new, and it's much easier compared to all the bosses you fought recently. The Parade Master was better at the beginning, where you were just getting situated. The few new attacks he has are fine. He hits a bit harder and he gives decay, but that's really it. His moveset is very simple, and he's very easy, which makes him a bit unengaging this late into the game. I mean, it's nice to have a little breather after this, but his oversimplicity made the fight less enjoyable for me. I can see a decent reason for why this boss is so easy, is so that you can just blow through him and quickly rush over to the hotel. Because at this point in the story, the hotel is unexpectedly under attack, and the player is currently rushing over to help. So having to deal with another swamp monster where the player is constantly dying might be a bit of a pace breaker. The trade-off for this, unfortunately, is that the boss just ends up being a bit lackluster. The Corrupted Parade Master is overall a pretty meh boss for me. I don't know if it was lack of time that made them want to reuse the Parade Master here, but I still think they did at least an okay job. I don't think he's a bad fight, he's mostly just there. I think he's a good example of boss reuse done well, I just wish they could have added a bit more to him. And now we move on to what I consider to be the worst fight in this game. When I started making this video, I just knew that this boss was going to be my least favorite, and I'm not surprised that I'm right. It's not even that I really hate it, I just found it to be the most annoying and unengaging. I am at least happy that my least favorite boss in this game wasn't something that I actively dreaded having to play again. The feeling was more of an annoyance, like a, oh, right, I have to deal with these guys again. Rather than a, holy fuck, I do not want to fight these guys again, please for the love of God, you know what, I'm cheating this time. Annoying is the word that I want to highlight here. It's like you're dealing with a bunch of little pests instead of fighting an actual boss battle. Every single thing these guys do is annoying rather than actually threatening. The double teaming, the constant staggering, the status buildup, the inconsistent pace of the fight, the long combos, the puppet string, the projectiles, the length of the fight, the run back. There's a lot to go over. It's not even that the fight was even that hard. They were just tedious and annoying to me. Each member does very little damage to you. It seems like their only purpose is to stun lock you and combo you into oblivion. I highly recommend stacking as much defense as you possibly can, because you'll just become an absolute wall. Look at how many times these guys hit me and I still barely take any damage. Most of the time, the fight wasn't super hard, but the thing is, I don't even know if I even want it to be harder, because then the fight would just be even worse. The only positive things I have to say about this fight, well, just like Eldest Brother again, the fight does have an emphasis on positioning, which can be fun to work around, but unfortunately, it's done a lot worse here. Alright, I'm supposed to talk about positives. This boss was my first time fighting a gank fight of 3, which was interesting, I guess. I do like Eldest Brother being resurrected. That was a pretty nifty twist. I don't particularly mind the boss reuse again here because it feels like a very different fight from the first one, for mostly worse. The story context here is also pretty good. The Brotherhood swore revenge on us for killing their brother, so they attacked the hotel, putting all our friends at risk, and now they're here for a grudge match. But, at the same time, we also want revenge on them for attacking the hotel. It's why the song is called Pray for Revenge. It's pretty cool. The story here is great, and I've liked the Black Rabbit Brotherhood as characters. And that's about all the positives I can think of. They're still somehow not as bad as Godskin Duo, I guess? But that's like saying getting hit in the balls with a baseball bat is better than having them being smashed by a hammer. But what exactly doesn't work about this fight? A lot. But let's start with the biggest problem. The constant staggering. You are constantly, non-stop being hit stunned out of everything. And at times it can feel impossible to hit them. Every single attack they do can hit stun you. And now, every member has a ranged attack. So you're never safe from being interrupted. Remember what I said earlier about all the members having a ranged attack which shouldn't stun lock you? This was exactly the problem that I was worried about. It gets extremely obnoxious when you are dealing with one member and another one just randomly throws something at you off screen and stuns you. Getting hit once will usually snowball you into another hit, and then another hit, and then another one, continuously getting stun locked and comboed, and they keep piling on to the point where it feels like you're being prevented from playing the game completely. Which leads me into my next problem. Double teaming is far more frequent in this fight. Sure, more often than not they take turns attacking, which is good, but because there's 3 of them, it is far more likely to get into unlucky scenarios where multiple members attack you at the same time, making it impossible to dodge through them. It's pretty much impossible to keep every single member on the screen, so you just have to deal with random attacks that you can't see coming. Good luck trying to repair your weapon. And that fucking puppet string, my god. It feels cheaper than the first time, because now he's pulling you into others more often. What else is there? The members deal status. Oh boy, more status. As if I didn't have to deal with 2 other powerhouses of status just a little bit ago. All of the members deal a different type of status, which prevents you from properly preparing against 2 of them. Attribute resistance is necessary, and I guess just bring the converter of the status that you want to deal with the least. I do not like that this boss forces you to be vulnerable to other statuses. It feels a bit player hostile. At first, you might want to use Decay Protection, because the youngest seems to attack the fastest and can proc Decay on you very quickly. But then you'll run face first into the Battle Maniac's extremely long combos from before. and you'll wish that you brought fire resistance instead. Even the Eccentric's attack speed and aggression have been increased, and he can proc electric shock on you very quickly too. It feels like no matter what resistance you run, you are being screwed by something. It's far from the worst thing about this fight, but these negative things just keep piling on. The length of the fight is also very drawn out. This fight just felt way too long. Individually, each member doesn't have that much health, but all together, it's a lot. And you're never able to hit them more than once. They'll usually just keep jumping out of the way. My famous lightning quick JoJo sword combo is now useless in this fight. Mix this with the staggering, the long combos, ambiguous recovery times, and the fight slows down to an absolute crawl. Also, of course, it has to have the longest run back out of any of the bosses in this game. It's not horrendous, but is still just a cherry on top to how long this fight is. But after dealing with this first phase, I guess you could call it, the eldest brother gets revived for the occasion. Whoopee. Fighting the eldest brother by himself is a bit better than the trio, but not by that much. Everything I said about him when we first fought him pretty much applies here, except his attacks are even faster and harder to deal with. And also, his one critical weakness has been removed. He flinches way less, which makes the fight much harder for large weapons. His attack timings are even harder to read, and his animations are more janky than before. His main combo in particular looks pretty awkward. At least it feels like an actual boss fight this time. But there's another problem. If there is still a member of the Brotherhood left in the fight, they both do not stop attacking for each other. It's very, very frustrating to deal with. Earlier, everyone was taking turns in the fight, but they just don't do it with Eldest Brother. Maybe they forgot to put that in or something? This fight is a mess. It's tedious, frustrating, and annoying with very few positives. I don't have too much constructive here to even say. Most of the fixes I said with Eldest Brother could apply here, but I don't really know what else could be done to fix this fight. The Black Rabbit Brotherhood rematch unfortunately plants a huge stain on what I would consider to be a pretty strong lineup of bosses. Upon returning to this guy, I was debating on whether or not I even wanted to include him in this video. Just like the Corrupted Parade Master, it's debatable whether or not this could be considered a main boss, or just a mini-boss that blocks progression, kind of like the Walker of Illusions. In the case of the Door Guardian, there are actually even less traits present here compared to the Corrupted Parade Master. He doesn't have a boss weapon, a spirit pool, or even his own theme. The only things that define him as a main boss is that he blocks progression and he has a fog door. I decided that I wanted to include him on this list because he's actually a rather unique boss, and he has a more complex moveset than the Walker of Illusions. He is the first and only real gimmick fight in this game. Gimmick fights, just like gank fights, tend to be very hit or miss. Fortunately, I do think a little bit more positively about this one, but he's still a pretty lukewarm boss. I know a lot of people dislike this boss, so I want to be fair and give him any deserved criticism as well as praise. The gimmick for this fight is that you barely deal any damage to him normally, and you have to hit him with a critical hit to do big damage. It's a very simple mechanic that slightly changes the way the player will want to approach the fight. Instead of going for raw damage, you'll want to go for stagger damage, which means using bigger and blunter weapons, lots of parrying, and that sharpener that increases stagger damage. If you want to kill him really fast, you'll want to combine all of these together, but I didn't feel at all pressured to do so. I was able to beat him just alright using only the stagger sharpener, but when I mixed that with more perfect guards and a blunter weapon, I was actually able to kill him very quickly. Overall, I thought it was an okay little switch up. I liked having to slightly alter my approach to fighting him. He is also pretty challenging on a first playthrough. This is the slowest paced boss on this list, which I don't actually mind. considering that all of the fights since the King of Puppets have been pretty fast paced, so having a slow one was perfectly fine by me. Being the slowest fight in this game, that naturally brings a problem with delayed attacks. Pretty much every single one of his attacks is delayed to an enormous degree. It looks like he's practically moving in slow motion, just begging to catch you on your roll. The delays are pretty annoying and tough to get the timing down, but I didn't have a huge issue with it. The majority of his attacks are pretty easy to avoid, even with the delay. You can easily step away from a lot of his attacks, and you can also sneak in like 2 to 3 hits depending on what weapon you're using. I felt like I was able to easily work around the massive delays. Although, perfect guarding it can be very difficult, but it isn't super necessary here. Dodging in this fight is very viable, and you can compensate for less stagger being built up from parrying by bringing other stuff. His moveset is very simple. He's easy to read and doesn't have any real tricks, aside from the crazy delays. And despite how slow he attacks, the fight didn't really feel like it was dragging on or anything. He's decently aggressive, and the arena is pretty small, so you're always close together and having engagements with him. The biggest challenge here is dealing with the shock status. It forces you to be much more careful with your actions, which is something that I do like. Sometimes it can feel like the game is artificially crippling you to increase difficulty, but it really isn't unmanageable. He attacks so slowly that it gives you enough time to regenerate stamina or cure yourself, so I don't think it's a very big deal. It's something that I was easily able to get the hang of, and if you know what you're doing, you can kill him very quickly, which is pretty satisfying. Also, if you happen to have the Parade Master's Amulet or the Swamp Monster's Amulet, then those are basically hard counters for him, especially if you're having trouble perfect guarding. He's a decent fight. He's not great, but he's not terrible. I know a lot of people really don't like this boss, and I think that's completely understandable. I personally thought he was just okay. I do think this boss does have some positive things going for him. The Door Guardian is not a very substantial boss. He's arguably the most forgettable one on this list, but I don't think that's a huge flaw with him. He doesn't need to be an insanely challenging fight or a huge visual spectacle. He serves his purpose well. He's a simple guardian to the final dungeon. While he isn't super hard, he's certainly no slouch and can kill you really easily if you're not paying attention to your stamina. But he's significantly easier than the Swamp Monster and the Black Rabbit Brotherhood. He's a necessary break before what comes later. Although, I feel like there was nothing that could properly prep you for these next 3 bosses coming. Here we are. We finally made it to the big one. If you've made it this far into the video, thank you so much for sticking around. This is likely the one boss that you've been waiting to see. Laxasia the Complete is by far the most brutally difficult fight up until this point, and arguably the most difficult fight in the whole game. She is so much harder that I actually felt legitimate whiplash by how sudden this spike was. I do find it a bit problematic when bosses or areas in these games get sudden difficulty spikes like this. Arch Abbey as a dungeon felt noticeably more difficult than any other area up until this point, but it still felt like a natural difficulty increase compared to the also difficult Barren Swamp and the Collapsed Street. But Laxasia is a much higher spike even compared to the Swamp Monster. I'd prefer it if the rest of the game was steadily getting more and more difficult rather than shifting around like it's been doing. I have had the biggest shift in opinion on this fight compared to anything else in this game, but it isn't just because of the difficulty. It was actually for a whole different reason that I will get into on her second phase. But of course, let's start with her first one. Her first phase isn't half bad, but it has its issues. Laxasia is very imposing from the moment we see her plunge her spear into Victor's chest, and the way she stomps over towards the puppet of Geppetto clad in spiky armor, dragging her ginormous sword on the ground, she leaves a very great impression. Onto the fight itself, This is the closest thing to feeling like a true duel in this game. When you're taking the fight seriously, it feels amazing. Her attacks are super heavy and super powerful. You can really feel the impact of every single one of them, and parrying them is orgasmically satisfying. Other bosses like Romeo and Eldest brother have this duel-like feel to them, but there is something more satisfying about clashing weapons with Laxasia. She has a pretty varied moveset with some cool lightning abilities, and I found them all fun to dodge around. Oddly enough, my biggest critique towards this phase is that it's actually too easy. The phase can kind of be a joke if you know what you're doing. To a degree, you can quote-unquote bully any boss in this game, but for Laxasia's first phase, I felt like it was way too easy to make her look like an idiot. A contribution to this is with her delayed attacks. Holy crap. If the Door Guardian is the king of delayed attacks, then Laxasia is the goddess of delayed attacks. I don't mind her having delayed attacks in general because she is supposed to be heavy and powerful while in her armor, but the level of delay on some of these attacks is just flat out silly. If you have a fast weapon, you are easily capable of sneaking in like 3 or 4 hits for like half of her attacks. It's also super easy to just simply run behind her and start damaging her back shield. After a few times fighting her, all of her attacks became comedically easy to avoid. And I'm emphasizing the word comedically. This, rushing attack, I guess, is probably one of the goofiest things that I've seen a boss do in one of these games, besides the damn mad clown puppet, which is supposed to look goofy. At times, it literally looks like I'm speeding her up and slowing her down in my editing software. She'll go from normal-ish speed to comedically slow to unnaturally fast, to the point of her animation literally tweaking out. She'll start by moving super quickly, missing every single hit, only for her to randomly decide to move in slow motion, instead of like, I don't know, stopping the combo entirely. This is one of the easiest attacks to avoid in this game. Even if she uses it close to you, she'll always throw in a delayed swing on the second or third hit, which gives you plenty of time to run away and watch her flail around like a moron. The problem I have with these delayed attacks isn't that it inflates difficulty, it's actually the opposite. Because of the severity of the delays, it makes it super easy to just run behind her without any thought. The only ounce of difficulty that comes from her is her ambiguous recoveries. There are times where she'll swing her sword into the ground and she'll have it sitting there for like a whole 3 to 5 seconds while she's breathing heavily. It'll look like she's recovering, but it actually turns out she was still in the middle of an incredibly slow combo. The problem with this is that there are some combos where she'll decide to follow up and sometimes she won't. You're never 100% sure when she's actually done attacking, or if she's just winding up an ungodly slow attack. This can be annoying at times, but she's still really easy despite that. To be honest, with all my critiques towards this boss, it probably sounds like I don't like it more than I actually do. I have warmed up to this phase the more I played it, and I do think it's a decently fun fight. I think the mood of this fight is great, and the arena on top of the bridge is really cool. Laxasia herself is a pretty cool character, and there was always a sense of anticipation the moment she appeared on screen for the first time. She can be fun when you take her seriously, and I found her moveset to be engaging. But unfortunately, she ends up being too easy and too slow for my liking. While her first phase is a bit anticlimactic, she is quick to remedy this with her second phase. This phase change is one of the coolest looking in the game. It's up there with Romeo's. She drops her armor like a DBZ character dropping off their weighted clothing that's only limiting their true power. And she reveals to us her true form. And, oh, Well, at least they know what kind of players they're marketing to. What can we say? Us Souls fans just love it when tall, overpowered dummy mommies beat the shit out of us. Anyway, so, after thoroughly catching feelings, you're gonna be catching a lot of...
The arm of God! The arm of God! Worship, Sir Monk! Worship! Worship, Sir... The arm of God will awaken soon!
And here is the biggest difficulty spike that I've ever seen in a video game. If you asked me when I first fought her, I would tell you that Laxasia was far more frustrating than fun. On my first playthrough, I actively disliked fighting her. The main reason for this was the absolute absurd visual clutter. The fight is very visually striking, arguably has some of the best visuals in the game. But at the time, I felt that the spectacle was taken way too far to the point where it hindered gameplay. There's so much lightning, debris, sparks, and the now added rain that it can become very difficult to see what Laxasia is doing. I don't know how bad it looks to you guys when watching the video, but whatever you see here, I promise you it affects you way more when you're actually playing. The excessive particles made it difficult to differentiate her animations from each other. When split-second decisions and precise timing are very integral to your game, these little obstructions can throw off the player and artificially inflate the difficulty. Luckily, I was playing on PC, so I decided to go into my graphics settings and lower effects quality. Unfortunately, if you're having the same problem on consoles, you're just gonna have to deal with the excessive particles. But fortunately, that was actually the only huge issue that I had with her. With that being said, onto her actual moveset. Do I think that Laxasia is so difficult to the point where she deserves the title of Malenia 2.0 that the fanbase has been giving her? In my opinion, no. Because she doesn't have an automatic win button. But also, Laxasia is just significantly easier than Malenia in general. Laxasia is not some overly oppressive force that prevents you from playing aggressively. She doesn't have any insanely quick combos that come out faster than you can roll through, and you don't have to rely on breaking her AI pathing to win the fight. Just like a lot of difficult bosses in this game, Romeo, Swamp Monster, and Laxasia, they'll usually feel a bit cheap and unfair at first. One cheap example that I had was with her animations. They're a bit janky. It sometimes looks like she's just pausing and glitching into different animations. I'm not quite sure if this is intentional, but it just looks a bit off to me. It does convey a sense of speed, but I wonder if there was a better way to showcase this. These animations can make the constant zipping around the arena a bit annoying to deal with. It initially feels like there's no telling what animation she'll do out of the teleport. You have an incredibly short amount of time to try and figure out what kind of swing she's doing, and figure out when to dodge/parry it. Will she do the delayed swing, or will she do the quick swing? There's really no telling. And you have to do it while the screen is filled with all this visual clutter, which can lead to what feels like unavoidable damage. At least, that was how I felt my first time fighting her. After teleporting in front of me, I've only seen her do 3 different attacks out of the teleport. So predicting her isn't actually that hard. At first, with the hardest bosses in this game, it'll feel impossible to react to them and dodge their crazy combos, and then retaliate because of how unrelenting they feel. But they are fights that you can understand and learn, and they don't require a robotic level of precision to beat. Laxasia, along with Romeo and the final boss, were 3 bosses that I initially thought would attack too quickly and frequently for slow weapons to be viable. I'm happy to say that so far with Romeo and Laxasia, this is not the case. My Motivity playthrough was my second time ever beating her, and it took me way less tries than I thought it would. When fighting her, I found that she was a lot more predictable than I thought at first. Despite how fast and flashy Laxasia looks, the time between her attacks is surprisingly lenient. And you probably won't realize this until you actually use a heavy weapon and begin to pick on these little openings. I think overall, fast weapons have an advantage here, but it wasn't to the point where I felt forced to use one. Also, if you're really having trouble with a heavy weapon, the game supplies you with enough full moonstones that you could fully upgrade a faster one if needed. She also doesn't have anything blatantly overpowered or anything that requires a stupid amount of luck to avoid. While I do think her animations are a bit awkward looking, I don't think they're outright bad. and I've gotten used to the particles, but I still think they could be toned down. Maybe if the rain was a bit more subtle, like right after you kill the King of Puppets. It might look a bit better that way. But I do have to admit the effects still look cool. I particularly enjoyed her initial lightning attack. It almost felt like a little dodging minigame, and it was actually pretty fun to weave around. But you can also perfect guard the orbs and send them back at her, which is even more fun and satisfying to pull off. The only attacks I have a problem with are her 2 delayed attacks where she suspends herself in the air then instantly plunges herself on top of you. The delay here is pretty absurd on both attacks and is incredibly annoying to parry them. I ended up opting for the Swamp Monster Talisman to deal with these attacks in particular, just because of how annoying they were. Despite some issues I had at first, I had a good time fighting her second phase. Laxasia is another pretty polarizing boss, but I've seen her lean more positively towards most people. She does have her defenders for, reasons. In all seriousness, some people say this was their favorite boss in the game, and I can see why. And some people hate her because of her delayed attacks and the polarizing difficulty. Overall, I thought she was great, but brought down a little bit by her first phase. She's a pretty good boss, and just like I said with Romeo, this boss is learnable and fair, even if it doesn't feel like it at first, and once you get past some growing pains with her, this boss can be quite fun. Circling back to my point about Laxasia being an abnormally large difficulty spike, my point was immediately proven correct with my fight with Simon Manus. This fight was one of the most surprisingly easy ones in the game. Emphasis on surprising. I didn't expect him to be as easy as he was my first time around. This is the polar opposite side of my critique of Laxasia being an incredibly sudden difficulty spike. But I cut her some slack because I believe that Laxasia's difficulty wasn't the problem, but the game itself before her wasn't increasing in difficulty enough to keep up with her. And also her first phase was really easy. Once I got past the initial whiplash and understood her mechanics more, I found her to be quite fun. In Simon's case, him being way too easy makes the fight really anticlimactic. This is the main bad guy and the second to last boss of the game, or the final boss if you're fucking evil, and to end it with a fight this easy is disappointing. It's one thing to have someone like Victor who was easy because he felt fair and didn't have any cheap tricks. But it's another thing to have Simon had like half the game being built up only for me to take him out super easily. And it's not really that he felt fair, it's more like he felt underpowered. This is the end of the game. It should kick your teeth in. What makes him so easy is that he has such a low amount of health and damage. If you know what you're doing, you could beat his first phase in like 30 seconds. Actually, even if you don't know what you're doing, you can do that. I've heard this boss was nerfed a lot since its launch, but I'm not entirely sure by how much. But considering I beat him on my literal second try, I think it's safe to say that they might have nerfed him a bit too much, or just nerfed him in the wrong way. Or actually, both, most likely. I have heard a lot of negative things about this boss fight from a lot of people. They mainly state that this boss was one of the worst fights in the game and seemed to be poorly designed and even unfair. This is obviously talking about his launch date. After all the nerfs, I didn't think he was too flawed, but I want to highlight some complaints that people have with him. One of those complaints was that the camera was too zoomed in and makes it so that you cannot see his hammer while he's attacking. I didn't see this as a major issue. Most of the time I was able to see his hammer, and the times that I couldn't, I was able to tell what he was doing just based on the movement of his arm. Although, I think this boss would be better if the camera was zoomed out, just like with the King of Puppets or Door Guardian. This would be a very easy change that could be addressed in a patch, and it would make the fight less frustrating for people who found the camera to be a problem, and would even emphasize how big and intimidating he is, a better change overall. What was more annoying to me than the camera was his ambiguous recovery times, which is another problem a lot of people had. Yes, another case of ambiguous recovery times, except it's far worse with Simon than it is with anything else in the game. His attacks already have a slight awkward delay, but what makes them annoying is when Simon seemingly hesitates to follow up. Here's what I mean. This was the only boss in the game where I could see his recovery being interrupted mid-combo. He's like, I'm done attacking. No, I'm not. I think I'm done. No, I'm not. It's always so unexpected when it happens. It doesn't happen all the time, and when it does happen, the attacks are slow enough for you to realize that he's attacking again. So it doesn't completely ruin the fight, but it's fairly annoying when he catches you off guard with an unintentional fake out. He can also do it when he puts his hammer on his back, which makes it look like he's done attacking, but then he follows up with a slam. And honestly, this one caught me off guard a lot. But at worst, all this really did was force me to play a little bit less aggressively, and it might have forced me to sacrifice a couple of attack opportunities. Not that it really matters because of how low his health is. But not all of his moves are frustrating though. I do like some of his lightning-based attacks. Or fire-based? Ergo-based? I don't know. They do make the fight a bit more interesting, but I wish he had more of them in this phase. Most of his attacks are pretty basic, and his moveset is very limited. The way his sweeps come out is kinda unique. The range is surprisingly far, and the timing can really trip you up. But that's really it. His first phase doesn't really leave a huge impression and is kind of uninteresting. The visuals of this fight do get a thumbs up for me though. I like the design of Simon, showcasing his attempts of becoming a god getting out of his control. Or at least, I think it is. I don't really know. Maybe this is what he wants. His body is completely disfigured and bloated like a balloon. It looks like he's about to explode of ergo. The arena is also visually striking. It looks perfect for a final encounter. On top of this huge machine harvesting ergo at the very top of the final castle. It's pretty cool, and the lighting is very nice. The arena is also super open, giving you plenty of space to deal with his wide sweeps, area of effect attacks, and his projectiles, which is great. The arena here is honestly one of my favorites in the game, and the visuals get way better than they already are with Phase 2. You have what I think is the strangest but arguably coolest phase change in the whole game, with a very pretty change to the background. The reveal of Simon's new body is fairly shocking. His design is very interesting to look at. The little cocoon hiding the arm of God, which looks similar to Archbishop's cocoon. The fact that his arm is beating just like the P organ, it's all so interesting. And there's probably tons of lore explanations for all of this that I just don't really know right now. I'm a little torn on whether or not I actually like this phase more than the first one. He has some more magic attacks which I like. It's basically what I was hoping for his first phase. Each of his magic attacks are very unique. He's got basic projectiles, delayed projectiles, wave attacks, turrets, pillars of light, God himself, you know, all the normal stuff. I really like all of them. They're all very fun to avoid, especially when you're dodging one thing after another one, and you just feel like the fucking Matrix. It's very satisfying. His projectiles definitely make the fight more interesting, but also more frustrating at times. Sometimes you'll just get absolutely spammed with projectiles with no consistent way of avoiding them. I haven't had it super bad before, but I think it's possible for Simon to do like 2 or 3 different magic attacks together, like the light pillars mixed with the turrets mixed with his own projectiles, which could possibly lead to some rare instances of unavoidable damage. Sometimes he'll use his Red Fury Pounce while you're running away from other projectiles, which could force you to be hit by him or by the projectiles. But this is the only good example of this I can show. I didn't really feel like it was that bad to deal with. All of his magic has very slow tracking, and they can be avoided easily by just jogging away or sprinting. The light pillars and the turrets don't stick around for long enough for them to be mixed in with other attacks, most of the time. The most annoying part of the fight is, again, the delayed attacks and the ambiguous recovery times, which I found to be a lot harder to deal with in this phase with the projectiles up my ass. Multitasking the projectiles and the strict timings of Simon's attacks was pretty frustrating for me in this phase. But like I said, they all do a pitiful amount of damage. Simon has a lot more health in this phase, but his attacks still do hardly anything to you. Granted, when I actually beat him on my first playthrough, I did it with no pulse cells left. It seems like you're given a lot of room for error in this fight, which might be a blessing in disguise because I was getting hit a lot. It's always really hard to predict what Simon is going to do, and I felt like I haven't gotten much better at this fight even after multiple playthroughs. He doesn't only get magic attacks in this phase, he also gains a ton more basic attacks. And once again, I have mixed feelings about this. His combos are longer, a bit faster, and are more unique, which I like. But the more complex combos makes his ambiguous recovery windows even harder to deal with. And all of the attacks have really awkward delays. And this fucking pounce attack is just, I hate this attack. The timing is just so strange on it, and it feels like he lands at different times whenever he uses it, even though he technically doesn't. This fight is kind of all over the place. And overall, I think it's okay. What I think should be done with this fight is to tone down the frequency of all of his attacks, and to remove some of the delays on some of the attacks so he feels a bit more consistent and more natural to dodge. And fix the ambiguous recovery times, because this is not fun to deal with. Simon Manus is probably the most mixed that I've been with these bosses. There are a few things that I really like about him, but there's an equal amount of things that I don't like as well. I do like his design, but his attacks are pretty boring visually. His second phase fixes this by adding more magic attacks, but at times they feel a bit unfair to dodge. I like that he attacks faster and more often in his second phase compared to the first one, but I think his attack frequency was taken a bit too far, especially with all the magic attacks. He swings both ways for me. Simon is not a bad fight for me, but as the main villain of the game, he unfortunately left a lot to be desired in my eyes. And finally, sending us off on an amazing high note, we have the Nameless Puppet. If Simon felt a little disappointing to you for a final boss, then the Nameless Puppet is sure to rectify that. The Nameless Puppet exceeds in every single aspect, just like Romeo did. Amazing design, a visually striking arena, interesting lore, very integral to the story, an amazingly eerie soundtrack, fun moveset, while also being very difficult but still fair. Everything comes together to make an absolutely amazing boss, and a nearly perfect final encounter. Starting off, once again, with the visuals. The area under the abyss is a very cool and eerie looking arena, and it perfectly sets the mood for the fight. The super long elevator is great build up for the boss, literally digging into the depths of Archabbey unsure of where we're heading to, only to be surprised when we see Geppetto waiting for us all the way down here, in a very obvious boss arena. By then you'll probably realize what is about to happen. I love the lighting and color down here. It's so pretty, but it's also eerie and kind of creepy. This place is so dark and dreary and really makes you wonder what this room was even made for, and what sort of secrets the alchemists were hiding down here. The music is so damn good too. The bells, the scratching, the whispers, and random other sound effects, and of course, gothic choirs. It's amazing and fits perfectly, and it's such a unique track. The added dialogue from Geppetto and eventually the flashback lines is a great touch to the atmosphere. I love all of Geppetto's dialogue here, mocking and talking down to you, calling you a useless puppet, and then eventually in phase 2, hearing people from earlier in the journey, it makes me want to win even more. The design of Nameless is really cool as well. This guy definitely has the most disturbing design of anything in this game. The mixture of human skin and metal, his odd color, his mouth and eyes are filled in, and his face is covered in blood, and even his scissor blade is not only cool, but also just a creepy weapon for him to use. And of course he has to be like 9 feet tall, because he is a Souls boss after all. I absolutely love everything about his design, and it's one of my favorites in the game. The story behind him is great as well. The Nameless Puppet is Geppetto's first attempt at reincarnating Carlo, by using his corpse and crowbarring it onto another puppet to make a new body. Lovely. And apparently with our P-Organ, he'll turn this back into Carlo using ergo magic or something. I don't really know exactly how it works, but it makes sense in the context of what Ergo is capable of. Now, the fight. This guy is cool as hell. And he's tough as hell. His attacks are very quick, and the guard timings are very strict. But I didn't feel like it was unmanageable. I was able to get the hang of him pretty quickly, but the real challenge here is whether or not you could do it consistently over a long period of time. This is one of those bosses where you'll feel like you're doing amazing. You'll be blocking so many attacks coming your way, and you'll feel amazing while doing it, only to realize that you've done nothing but guard and dodge, and you've barely made a dent in his health, and then you get wiped out instantly once you make a mistake. The difficulty on this fight for me was actually pretty inconsistent. Initially, I found this boss to be easier than Laxasia. The Nameless Puppet only took me about 25 minutes of total playtime to actually beat him on my first playthrough, while Laxasia and Romeo took almost 2 to 3 hours. Now don't get me wrong, Nameless is still difficult, and he was difficult on my first playthrough, but I'm saying that this boss did not give me the kind of difficulty that Laxasia gave me, or even other final bosses that I enjoyed, like Radagon from Elden Ring or Ishin from Sekiro. Upon returning to him, I oddly had a much harder time with him, particularly on my Advance and New Game Plus playthrough. I'd love to know if anyone else had the same experience because I thought it was odd. I don't know if it was because I was using slower weapons on all of my playthroughs, or if it was just me being underleveled, or me trying to focus on perfect guarding rather than dodging was just harder. Whatever the reason was, I just had a lot of trouble returning to this boss. This is the most parry-oriented fight in this game. It's practically a Sekiro fight in terms of attack speed and attack frequency. And it's pretty damn tough to get the timing down on all these attacks. But it's so satisfying and doesn't feel unfair. But I've noticed that there are some attacks where if you fail to dodge or block them, you'll end up getting hit by the very next attack, essentially punishing you twice for failing to avoid one attack. It happens with this one little jump twirl, and also another attack in his second phase. I couldn't seem to be able to do any actions fast enough to avoid the second hit, but it's a minor critique. Other than that, the fight feels like such an awesome duel. Now, he has a ton of different moves and combos, probably the most amount in the game. He can change the orientation of his weapon, which makes him attack differently. He'll switch between heavy swings, quick swings, and thrusting. It's a very nice way to keep the fight fresh. And it doesn't feel unfair because you know what fighting style he's in by how he's holding his weapon. Also, you'll likely be quick to notice that almost every move he has is based off of attacks from the player. Some of you might think that sounds lazy because they're reusing assets again, but here it works really, really well. First of all, it is really cool to see your own moves be used against you. It's because the Nameless Puppet is the original Carlo. We are in fact one and the same. Both puppets without a name based on the same person, except he's not as pretty. His moves are tweaked slightly and strung together to make meaningful and fun combos. His moves work very well in a boss fight, and it feels way better to fight against compared to the other player type fights in my opinion. This is probably the best reuse of assets that I've seen for a boss fight. Making the final boss basically a tweaked evil version of yourself is really cool. He's even doing something that I really wish I could do: dual wielding. Damn it, it's like he's mocking me. And speaking of phase 2, this cutscene is awesome. It is pretty rare to actually see P in a cutscene in this game, so the few times that we see him animated, it feels pretty special. It almost makes us feel more connected to the boss, which makes sense. The design of Nameless somehow gets even more unsettling after this transition. With his head cut off, free from his puppet strings, his weapon is leaking out this weird blood red energy that we've never seen before. It's awesome, and it gives me the chills. His second phase really ramps things up. The pace here is blazing quick. His mobility is insane. He starts spinning and flipping and flying around the screen like a freaking anime character. The amount of hitboxes being thrown at you can feel a bit excessive, but perfect guarding is still very effective here. I think overall fast weapons are favored in this fight. But I was incredibly surprised to find out that my Motivity playthrough was actually the one where I beat him the easiest, and that was the first one that I played on. And I was using Simon's slow as hell weapon. That's a +4 by the way, not even max upgrade. Look at this freaking damage right here, my god. Despite how fast his attacks are, Nameless actually attacks less often than Simon did. He actually does give you a surprising amount of opportunities for you to attack him. All of his moves here are brand new, and they look amazing. The effects here are beautiful, and his attacks are very flashy and badass. And goddamn are they tough to parry. This phase is way harder than the first one. But it still feels like a natural difficulty increase, because his first phase was pretty hard by itself. This is arguably the most difficult thing that you could fight in this game. This phase goes into goddamn overdrive, and you can't viably use the sidestep here, because Nameless has so many multi-hit attacks that can catch you mid-recovery. Another thing I'm a little iffy on is that most of his attacks hit you twice in quick succession, similarly to how the King of Puppets did, meaning that when you perfect guard a hit, you'll likely block the next one and then lose a bit of health that you have to regain, unless you just spam the block button and get lucky, which is really risky. But that's just my take on it. I will give this boss some credit though, is that it really does feel like a final test. Being able to perfect guard nearly every single hit coming at you is probably the best form of skill expression in this game, and it does feel very fitting that the final boss would push you to that point. When you get into a consistent rhythm with the perfect guard, my god is it amazing. You'll truly feel like such a badass fighting him. This fight is fantastic, and I think it easily fits in with the greats of this whole genre. The Nameless Puppet is everything a final boss should be. A stellar end to an amazing game and a great lineup of bosses. Whew, that was a lot. Well, now that I'm finally done rambling, it is time for my favorite part, moving on to my personal tier list for these bosses. The Parade Master, a great way to start the game. Very sinister and awesome design, with a great soundtrack that fits the game's tone. Straightforward moveset, very forgiving but not too easy. Perfect for the beginning of the game and teaching you the basics. And he leaves a great first impression. A tier. The Scrapped Watchman, the first major skill check. The fight is fast paced, and his moves are unique and fun to dodge around. His lightning in phase 2 makes the fight more interesting and adds some flair to his attacks. He feels very consistent and polished. Very difficult but very fair. S tier. Fuoco. Pretty lukewarm boss. You get it? You get it? His delayed attacks are a bit annoying but not super punishing or hard to get down. His range and area denial gives him a bit of an identity, and his attacks are pretty fun to maneuver around. Not stellar but still good. B tier. Archbishop. Has my favorite design in the game and my favorite soundtrack. His fight is slower paced, which isn't a bad thing, but his moveset in phase 1 is limited and a bit underwhelming. His second phase I enjoyed more. The alternating moveset is a cool mechanic, and I liked the increased difficulty, but he has some awkward delays and springy hitbox attacks that can be frustrating to deal with. B tier. Eldest Brother. First gank fight of the game, and it isn't very good. His moveset is frustrating with tons of awkward looking delays and lunges. The speed of his attacks is changing constantly, and it feels incredibly awkward. The other members make the fight worse overall. They all have attacks that stun you in place and ruin the pacing even more. The only positives is that the fight forces you to focus on your positioning, which is pretty fun. D tier. The King of Puppets. Easily the best fight in the game for me. Visuals are absolutely stellar, with amazing designs for both phases. Great soundtracks, awesome arena to fight them in. Both phases have incredibly satisfying combat, unique and varied movesets, incredibly difficult while still being very polished and fair. The most satisfying boss to beat in my opinion. S tier. Victor. The fastest paced fight in the game, super exhilarating, very fun moveset, and satisfying combos to parry. He's super simple and straightforward with no cheap tricks or gimmicks. The main critique I have is that he's way too easy, but I still had a lot of fun with him. A tier above Parade Master. Green Monster of the Swamp, the most controversial boy in this game. His fight is very chaotic, which can be pretty fun, but it's also pretty frustrating. His delays are too severe for my liking, and his combos can look a bit awkward, but those are my only negatives. I found his fight to be really fun fun once I got it down. He's incredibly difficult but super satisfying to master. This fight has its flaws, but I still really enjoyed it. Top of B tier. Corrupted Parade Master. This one's kind of uninteresting. It's the most it's there boss on this list. He's just a glorified phase 3 for the Parade Master with a slightly tweaked moveset to make him a little bit harder, but he's still really easy despite that. He has a neat design and a neat concept with the corrupted puppets. For a reused fight, he could have gone a lot worse. Not bad, but not great. C tier. The Black Rabbit Brotherhood. By far the most annoying boss in this game. Constant staggering, constant double teaming, random attacks from off screen, impossible to keep all members in view, the fight is long and tedious, the run back is long too, annoying status buildup, and puppet string. The Eldest gets revived, and he has all the same problems as his first appearance, except his animations are even more janky and his combos are even more annoying to deal with. F tier. Door Guardian. Another lukewarm boss. The only gimmick fight in this game, which makes him unique. The only way to kill him is via critical hits, which encourages the player to build towards stagger damage. It's a decent little switch up. The fight is filled with delayed attacks, and the shock status can be kind of annoying to deal with, but if you know what you're doing, you can kill him very quickly, which is fairly satisfying. Bottom C tier, but not bad. Laxasia. Her first phase is way too easy. Her attacks are slow, inaccurate, and super easy to counter. It makes the fight a bit boring. Her ambiguous recoveries can make her a bit annoying, but she's still really easy despite that. On a positive note, this is a really badass duel. She has a great intro and awesome arena. Her attacks look cool and are satisfying to parry. Great looking phase change with an enormous difficulty spike. She has all kinds of different attacks, ranged attacks, area of effect attacks, and even parry minigames. I found all of her attacks in this phase to be very fun, and I like the increased difficulty. Her second phase brings her fight to bottom A tier. Simon Manus. His first phase is boring and easy. His moveset is simple and limited. Moving on to phase 2. Phase 2 gets more engaging. I like his new design and music, and he gets more magic attacks. They're all unique and pretty fun to dodge around, but can get obnoxious if he spams you. Sometimes the fight is incredibly easy, and other times it feels impossible to not take damage for a whole 5 seconds. A mixed bag for me, but he was at least memorable and not boring. Top of C tier. The Nameless Puppet. Ooh, this guy gives me the chills. Amazing and disturbing design, cool arena, amazing lore, badass cutscenes, great music, great visuals, fun moveset, challenging and rewarding difficulty. Nameless has it all. This fight pushes you to your absolute limit and forces you to play at your best. He has the most varied moveset in the whole game, mimicking different weapon types that the player uses, and then ending the fight by dual wielding. A great way to end the game with an amazing duel with an evil version of yourself. S tier. And here is the final rankings. Thank you all for listening to me ramble about one of my favorite video games of all time. Remember that while I was trying to be as objective as I can on this list, giving my own feedback, and explaining how I personally think the bosses can be improved in some ways, remember that this is just my opinion on the game, and I'd love to hear what more people have to say about these bosses. On that note, thank you all so much for watching. This game really surprised me with how amazing it was, and I'm eagerly waiting for the DLC to come out this summer. And it's nice to know that we're in good hands.